Mrs. Kelle Hasenauer was born in the year 1979 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hasenauer attended Hempfield High School. Her mom's name is Wendy and her dad's name is Artie. Her mom took up a career in teaching for 21 years and just retired. Her dad was a truck driver. Their marriage lasted for 37 years before her dad passed away. She is the oldest child and she has 3 younger siblings. She became interested in the military her senior year of high school. Before entering the military, she lived in Provo, Utah, worked as a telemarketer, and lived with her 6 roommates.
Hasenauer originally started her military training with the Marines. After high school, she got a letter from her gunnery sergeant that invited her to join the military. She found the closest recruiting station and signed up. Hasenauer did not care which branch of military she served in. Her inspiration to serve was inspired from past veterans. Hasenauer's first area was Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, where she attended basic training. Here she discovered what it was like to be a member of a team and learned beneficial survival techniques. Advanced individual training was a little bit different than basic combat training because it was specific to whatever job she was going to do in the military. Hasenauer's specific training was for the moving and storing of supplies for the military. She was a 92 Alpha, aka an automated logistical supply specialist.
After that, she served in the Utah Reserves. She decided that going active duty interested her, so she filled out the necessary paperwork and was assigned to Korea. Her time in South Korea involved few confrontations. For example, there were certain days when the North Korean military would randomly shoot off missiles and the South Korean citizens would start to panic. The South Koreans were a mix of grateful and ungrateful for the Americans' help and protection. Later, she went to Fort Bragg in North Carolina. She ended her service with the Pennsylvania National Guard.
Even though she loved being in the military, there were still some really hard aspects she had to endure, physically and emotionally. She trained and exercised a lot so that she would be more prepared for the physical trials by doing things like running. In order for her to get into the military, she had to take the Army Physical Fitness Test. Even though it was hard for most, she said that the trainers made sure their students passed because that was the ultimate goal. Hasenauer believed one of the hardest physical parts was the required obstacle course. To pass, she had to climb up a high wall, go over it, and down the other side. She was also not a fan of another climbing exercise, which she explained as
It's small on the bottom, and you have to climb it's like an upside down pyramid. So it's like this, right? So I'm like, well, that's odd, but you have to climb up it on the outside of it, and I don't know how to explain it, but I'm like, what? You're crazy.
Even though all of these exercises were extremely difficult, she believed they pushed her to overcome her fears.
Hasenauer's earliest memory from the military was her first day, as she believed most people probably remember that. She recalled it as being a scary experience. She remembers being on a bus to get to her destination when a sergeant came and told everyone to get off. Then she had to move to the reception station where she got medical work and paperwork done. After a few days, she was given the materials needed to live there. Hasenauer remembers she was required to carry her stuff around wherever she went. She was so familiar with that life during the time, she remembered it all exactly almost to this day.
Hasenauer had a variety of instructors during her time of service. Some were nicer than others. Some were more memorable, for good and bad reasons. She believed that it was a drill sergeant's job to be strict, so she did not have too much of a problem with the concept of training and instructors. Hasenauer's view on this subject was,
And it can seem pretty scary, especially at first, but there truly is a purpose in it in the end, because they really break you down and then they build you back up at the end.
according to Hasenauer, instructors were different for each type of job or training.
Besides physically challenging, Hasenauer's military experience also had mentally challenging aspects. She thought the biggest challenge for her and most others was self-doubt. Thinking things like, I'm not going to make it, I'm going to fail, and this is a waste of my time, all would have made the experience more difficult for her. But she went in thinking positively, so it was not as much of a problem for her. She believed that her mentors, trainers, and instructors all had ways of building their soldiers up, whether that was through physical training or silly things like pranks. Hasenauer thought her training made her a better person and become mentally stronger than before.
Hasenauer loved military life. She was a little bit prepared for what it was going to be like because she watched military movies and shows. It was definitely a challenge at times, especially when she had to wake up early. One of her favorite parts about it was the structure, because the whole schedule had been planned out for her, and she believed it made life a little bit easier.
While in the military, Hasenauer had multiple jobs. One of these jobs was rear detachment. This job instructed her to stay with soldiers who were deployed or not and tell them if they were going overseas or not. This was a big honor for her because she was only ranked as a specialist, not an officer.
And some people will be like, wait a minute, she wasn't an NCO because I was a specialist, right?
This job was a lot of responsibility and she took it very seriously. Being an NCOIC was a mix of a lot of jobs. Hasenauer gave awards, did training, and handled any soldier issues that needed handling. Hasenauer was honored to do this job because she was an E4 doing an E7 job.
Another assignment she had was additional duties. During this service, she was a battalion career counselor. This required her to inform the soldiers about their benefits they would receive if they re-enlisted in the Army, if they wanted to go to school, become a pilot, or more. She helped mentor, influence, and educate them on their decisions.
Another job Hasenauer had was a combat lifesaver, or referred to by most as a CLS.
Well, as far as a combat lifesaver goes, everyone was taught how to do some basic life skills.
The main duties of a CLS is to save the lives of fellow soldiers who have simple yet deadly injuries with life-saving techniques. She described some of these life-threatening injuries as
Very simple to fix, but no one knew how to do it unless you would call for a medic.
Hasenauer uses the skills from her CLS training in her daily civilian life, but before this she had to go through training. When asked if the CLS training was stressful, she said,
The training was little, because you're like, I have to learn how to stick an IV in somebody.
when thinking about everything a CLS entails, there are a lot of circumstances that aren't ideal where a CLS would have to do a procedure in the middle of a desert or a war zone. So it is understandable that Hasenauer thought being a CLS was going to be a challenging job. Although she never used her training in the military and hoped she would never have to, she is now an EMT and uses these skills every day.
While doing all these different jobs, Hasenauer had some free time and enjoyed it with friends in the Army camaraderie.
The camaraderie is my favorite, super favorite. It's probably the thing I miss the most about the military, because you go through difficult times and you go through it together, and those are some deep bonds that you just can't recreate anywhere else.
While going through difficult training and stressful military experiences, the friendships she made were what kept her going throughout the long, hard days. Hasenauer still keeps in touch with some Army friends and is grateful for the friendships that she has formed.
Being in the Army was not all work and no play. There were plenty of times for play, remembers Hasenauer. She said,
Well, we used to go to the club, dancing. I mean, that's what everybody did. We went to the club and just hung out. I remember one time we were standing in formation, getting ready to get our weapons, and they had this really, it sounds complicated and I can't even explain it how they did it, but to get your weapon, you had to sing this cadence, this constant cadence to go up and get your weapon. But anyway, before we did that, there was one of the soldiers was standing up and sleeping. I don't know how he was like still standing up, you know. But one of the drill sergeants just stood there in front of him until he woke up. You know, when you open your eyes and there's somebody standing right there in your face.
all of these fun times would allow the drill sergeants' personalities to show through their usual stern and serious ones. Whether it was going out dancing, to the beach, or laughing at fellow soldiers, Hasenauer experienced fun times in the Army.
After being in the military on and off for 8 years, Hasenauer had to readjust back into her daily life multiple times, whether it was going from always having to be on time to dealing with people differently. The structure from military life made some of the biggest impacts on her. But one thing the Army taught her to do was to adjust and overcome in different situations, including adapting back into the civilian world, as Hasenauer called it. She also learned some life lessons from the Army. One life lesson was, if one believed they could do something and put their mind to it, they would be able to accomplish it. There were countless life lessons that could be learned from the Army.
There's just a lot of like intangible characteristics that just become a part of you that are really hard to explain.
Being extremely patriotic was one of those characteristics that stuck with her and were ingrained from her service time in the Army. The life lessons and engraved characteristics are what changed her and stayed with her even years after her service.
After Specialist Hasenauer's time serving, she went on to raise her family, work as an EMT, and give future generations patriotic advice. She said,
I believe that every young adult should serve in some capacity. And I don't believe that everyone is equipped to serve in the military, but I do believe that there are tons of organizations out there that need volunteers or people to serve alongside them. They need to explore, and be in situations that demand them to think and to find resources that are around them.
Hasenauer believed that everyone had a chance and the ability to serve in whatever capacity they had access to. We are extremely grateful for her and her service to our country.